Hey everyone, welcome to Relationship Mailbag. We are so excited that you're joining us today. I am Mark Gordon with Relationship Matters, and this is Drew Stevens with Beyond the Legacy. And we are so glad that you've joined us. We're kind of joined forces this summer to just answer some questions about relationships because we both really believe that relationships are the most and greatest impact on our legacies. Those people that we know, the ones that we come across, new and old friends, family, they all can affect our legacy either negatively or positively. And so we really want to just come on here and answer some real questions that are gnawing at people's lives. And we've had some doozies of conversations, that's for sure. So, Drew, it's great to be together again.
Absolutely. I think the summer series is going quick. August is almost over. So we're trying to get a few episodes in to close out the year. Maybe we'll do the first week of September. Who knows? We'll see. But I think one of the most important things of our conversations is we're having real conversations that I think people are resonating with. I know that because I'm receiving private messages offline from folks that are saying, thank you for sharing that. Maybe they're not publicly sharing that comment, but they're saying, thank you for sharing that. Or, hey, would you be interested in maybe doing this subject or theme? It's something personal that's affecting me or someone I know personally. So sometimes the subjects get a little heavy. Some are a little light and fun to talk about. But the last two episodes in terms of two-parter were around infidelity. And it got kind of heavy. But I had a conversation with Mark and I said, do we want to go lighter? Do we want to sort of stick with the stronger themes? And, truthfully, between what the community's saying and, after, definitely hearing from Mark and agreeing with him, like, let's have these real conversations.
Yeah.
Let's talk about topics and themes that matter to people that they want to hear, whether it's openly or in private, and could hopefully change the course of history for them from hearing this from both of us. So do you want me to dive into what we're going to dive into for this episode?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. Right. I think it's important to have these hard conversations. We don't see a lot of people. There's content out there to kind of address it formally, but it's hard to talk about these things with your circle or with people around, like the infidelity one. How do you introduce that into a coffee talk with somebody? And so I just think that these conversations are really important. And so, yeah, let's dive right in. Let's go. Let's see where we're going today.
Okay, so this one is, how does my relationship survive addiction with a loved one? Now we're talking family, partner, and the theme around addiction. So, like, how do we start from there? Like, what is addiction, Mark? Like, where do we start with just the definition, or what is addiction? Because there's many forms of it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Like we say, we're not tackling the light subjects. That's a big one, and it's personal to me because, of course, my audience realizes that I came from addiction. I came out of addiction. I didn't grow up in addiction. My wife did, but I did not. I grew up in a very religious home, but it was very strict, and so that created a fear of failure in me, and so I self-medicated to try and deal with that, and it turned into an addiction and almost destroyed my family. I'm so thankful that Sandy and I actually were able to come through that, and we've been married 39 years now. So the first and foremost, you can survive it. You can get through addiction and resolve and keep the relationship healthy. It is very difficult, and it takes both parties and everybody involved to be committed to it. Addiction is simply anything that takes control of your life. And so it's not always just drugs and alcohol. Sometimes addiction can be gambling, it can be pornography, it can be all kinds of different addictions out there, even workaholism. People can be addicted to work and they ignore their family, or they don't give attention to their family, and so addiction can come in many forms. It's generally speaking a way of thinking. It's a control that's over your thinking. And so you're not, in fact, you don't even have free will at that point. When it comes to a place of an addiction, it actually does the thinking for you. And I often tell people when I'm dealing with families coming out of addiction, there was the Mark, who was a great guy, had a great heart, But then there was the addicted Mark who would lie, cheat, and steal. And so I helped them separate the person from the behavior. And because we love the person, but the behavior we are enabling because we love the person too much. And so it can become very destructive to a family. And so, that's the short version, the best way I can describe it. And so, what addiction is affecting your family and your loved ones does make a difference. But they all have their own damage that they cause. Even the workaholism can actually cause. In fact, when I came out of addiction, by the way, I still had an addicted mindset. Like I still had that, addictive type personality, and so I just threw myself into sobriety, but also into work to try and make up for the years that I'd lost. And I had to actually go through another whole healing journey to let go of that drive so that I did not, affect my family in a negative way. Sure, I wasn't using and drinking and I wasn't stealing and I wasn't doing all those things anymore, but I was certainly choosing work over them. And I was certainly ignoring some of the signs that could have actually triggered me back into my addiction. So, so it's about a real transformation inside out. So it takes time. It takes time. We all seem to want the microwave society, right? We want it all to happen just like boom. It doesn't work that way in addiction. And if you think it's going to, you're probably in for a long haul. And so, yeah.
So there's many things to that, and it's a good segue as you mentioned, like signs, right?
Yeah.
So there's certain folks that are in a space right now where they know they're living with a partner that's going through addiction. It's very obvious. It's black and white. It's understood. Yeah. But then there's others that are living with it and they're very stealth, and
right.
And you would have no clue that something's going on. They're hiding bottles, or they're, doing something that you don't even recognize is happening behind closed doors or when they're away from your space.
Yeah.
So what are ways to identify behavior change and signs that your partner may be going through some form of addiction?
Yeah, it's a great question. Or your kids, your teenagers. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So some of the early recognitions are change of moods. They get more volatile, more anxious, more frustrated, more angry. They're up 1 minute and they're down the next, like deepest valleys, highest peaks. And that's a really good indicator something's going on, especially if they were pretty level before that, right? Loss of motivation. If people start to lose motivation, like they were, into a sport, for example, and just headlong into it, and then all of a sudden they weren't interested anymore, or schooling, or whatever the case, work, they start losing their jobs and or quitting their jobs. They lose motivation. I don't feel like going to work today. Lots of absenteeisms, things like that. Dishonesty and secrets. When they're starting to kind of be elusive and they become dishonest in their responses to your questions, you're kind of wondering what's going on. They'll get agitated, angry for you asking, and then they'll also just be just straight up lie to you about where they've been, what they've doing, and that kind of thing. I've worked with families where they literally found the bottle of alcohol, multiple bottles hidden in different places around the house, had them on the table, and the person denied it. Those aren't mine. I didn't do that. So there's a very dishonest thing. Broken promises is another big sign. If for the most part they've kept promises, they've been pretty good at following through on their word, all of a sudden they're not. They're breaking promises, and the simplest ones, the easiest ones, like that they always kind of just took care of. And all of a sudden now there's been a change. I think disappearing. Sometimes they just kind of disappear for hours at a time, or they are elusive and whatnot, not coming home from work, like they used to. It's the change of attitudes and behaviors that are your first indicators that there's something going on.
So I have a couple questions. I'm going to ask them in parts, right? So, number one, with everything you just shared, how do you confront, like in the most politically correct way and soft way, without, being a little too abrasive, right? In terms of
Yeah.
like accusing, like without accusing and assuming.
Yeah.
What is the right way to start that conversation around someone you know is struggling with
Yeah.
something?
Well,
Where do you
first of all,
start?
I never want to be politically correct, but I can be compassionate and caring and empathetic. So, just to clear that one up, Drew,
Okay,
um,
absolutely,
politically correct
absolutely.
actually is a form of deception. So it doesn't really, you got to be able to say what's on your heart. That's,
Yes.
in my book, the trust pillar, which is, 5 pillars of a healthy relationship. Trust is the first one because we need transparency and openness and whatnot. So, so I would use I language in communicating and saying, I'm concerned for you. I love you. I would show support and empathy in the opening up. I would take a curiosity position on rather than a judgment position and say, I'm confused. I'd like to just know why, like what's going on with you. I can see there's something shifted. And I just, again, underline that love and concern. And then the curiosity, just ask questions. Say, mate, can I ask you just a couple questions? Like, you know, um, because I'm noticing some of these things. So instead of dealing with specifics like, you didn't come, like you language, you didn't come home till 2 a.m. What were you doing? That you're not going to get a response. They're going to just deny and shift and whatever. But you could reframe that and say, I'm just noticed you're staying out later these days, and I'm concerned about your rest and your sleep, and I just want to know what's happening, what's going on with you. Um, the fact is, when somebody is on the addictive decline, they're probably not going to be honest with you anyway. But your responses and your questions matter, and how you ask them, the tone of voice. In communication, 7% is the word we speak, 38% is tone of voice, 55 is body language, and so we want to make sure that we're actually being compassionate, looking at them in the eye. By the way, when there's a lot of shame involved in addiction, so they can't look at you. They'll look down and away. They'll try not to make eye contact. That's a sure sign something's going on, right? So you want to just ask, no, look at me in the eye. Cup their face if you need to. Look at me in the eye. I care about you. I love you. I want to help. I want to be part of this journey with you. Please, I need honesty though. I need you to be honest with me. I can't help you if you're not honest. And so that's just some of the ways you can kind of start to approach it. The earlier that you notice the change is happening, that you address it, the better it is. The further they get entrenched in the addiction, quite often people aren't looking for the signs, or they don't recognize it, or they think, oh, he's just hanging out with the wrong crowd or whatever. You make excuses for them. That the further they get into the addiction circle or hole, the harder it is to get back out. And so they'll entrench and they'll burrow into it. And so earlier the better.
Okay. So what about, let's go origins, right? Like, so where does this derive from? It could stem, in terms of just stemming down from a family member that was battling addiction, mother, father, uncle, someone, aunt. But then also, what, if anything, are like triggers and things to be aware of that could cause someone to turn, in addition to influences like friends and who they surround themselves with, but like triggers, friends, family members, past. How do you take that and unpack it in terms of where everything's
listen,
coming
there's
from?
always a cause and effect. There isn't addiction for no reason. There's always a cause and effect somehow. This idea that it's generational and that it's a disease that is passed on, like some infirmities are. I don't buy into that completely. There's been some research, but a lot of it is not actually. If you talk to actual addicts, they're in my journey, I talk to a lot, and it's usually passed on because I often say the details of trauma aren't important as the effects of trauma. So when you grow up in an addicted household, yes, often they become addicted themselves, or they have addiction issues themselves because it's been modeled and patterned. And more importantly, the abuses that happen during the addiction have caused their own pain and their own heartache, which then they have to self-medicate to cover up because that's what's been modeled. So yes, there's a greater chance of repetitiveness or passing it on generationally for sure, but it's not It's not a have to. It's not like you know, that somebody can't break out of that. What we need to address to help anybody in addiction is we got to get to the cause and effect. Where's the pain point? What was their childhood like? What happened in their childhood? You know, a lot of people thought I had the perfect life. They thought, man, here's a guy raised in a good Christian home you know, and my parents were loved and adored by many people, and rightly so. They were wonderful people. But behind closed doors, there was a lot of anger, a lot of strictness, a lot of you know, shaming, a lot of things going on that affected me. And then I had an experience with you know, a few of my brother's friends that you know, of a form of abuse, a sexual abuse, and that, you know, nobody knew, nobody believed me, nobody. So now all of a sudden there's this cause and effect that took place, right? So you got to get to the cause and effect, or you're never going to change the whole thing. I had to be healed from the inside out. So accusing somebody, you know, judging them and driving, it'll just drive them further away. Trying to control them. You know, I have kind of this little 5 keys to survival, or 5 keys of what to do, and one of them is I can't want sobriety more than the person I love does. I can't want it more than they do, because if I do, that goes to the second one. I try to control them. And when I try to control someone's behavior and control them, it pushes them further away or into the addiction, because that shaming confirms those fears that are in their heart, that they're a loser, that they're not good enough, and so what we're doing is driving them further into the addiction by accusing them and yelling at them and, you know, wrestling them all the time and trying to control them. You got to let go of control. You cannot control another human being. You can't make them be sober. So, you know, it's so important to realize that but you do need to contrast behavior from the addiction or from the personhood. So for example, a lot of times we put labels on people, or, you know, it almost becomes a brand or a stigma attached to that person, like, oh, I have an addicted son, or I have an addicted son, you know, and there's a stigma that's attached to it. We got to remove the stigma. That person, like I said earlier, is still the person you love. That's still the husband you married because you love them. It's still the son and daughter that you love because, you know, you raised them. That happy-go child that was in there somewhere is still there. So it's a matter of, I try to take a strength-based approach. And if they can discover their value again, if they can discover that they are loved and important, contrast that behavior. And so, you know, I love you. However, it's not okay what you're doing here. It's not okay to do that. And so, because the other thing we do is when we love them so much, we tend to enable. We gloss over, we make excuses for them. We don't want to lose them, so we try to hold on too tightly, and then it just pushes them further into the thing. I think that the next one is you got to set boundaries for them and for yourself. Boundaries are really important. So once you've separated the behavior, listen, I love you, you need to put some boundaries in place. Somebody addicted in the family will literally take over the family. It'll take over all the energy. It'll suck the life. I've known so many siblings who have been doing great, who have had great accomplishments, but they have an addicted sibling, and the parents, all their attention go to that sibling that's addicted, and nothing goes to the person that was successful, that has been really trying. And then they have their own emotional things. That's a lot of times, by the way, that's where you'll see that person, that second child, will go into like workaholism, because they want to stay away from what they see their sibling doing, but they have to cope in their own way, so they throw themselves into career, throw themselves into school, whatever it might be, sports, you know. So a lot of times they're very successful in what they're doing, but it hasn't filled that empty spot in their heart of grieving the loss of their parents, because all their attention went to the other child. Does that make sense? So you need to set boundaries for yourself and also for them. And if they don't live by those boundaries, then you have to allow natural consequences to happen. Stop enabling them. That means, yes, they might have to leave the home. That might mean that they have to not be around. You might have to put a boundary up and say, I can't have contact with you until you get the help that you need. Now, you could, like you and I have talked about it before, Drew, you can provide resources. You can give them a list of resources. Here's some places you can go. Here's, I've done some research for you. Here's some help that you can get, but you can't force it on them. You have to just give it to them and say, when you're ready, you need to go here. But until you're ready, you've stolen from me. You've destroyed our house. You've pawned stuff in we can't have you living in the house anymore. And, or by the way, yeah, and just a quick one, if there's abuse in any way, that's the instant out, because emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse of any of those kinds, that needs to be addressed right away. and you can't, you're not going to hang on until you change them. You're just putting yourself at risk and others at risk. And it's tough love in it, but it's also the appropriate thing. If you keep leveraging the person, they're never going to get to the place where they need help or want help, especially with money, like with money. I've known so many families where they just keep supporting the person financially, and they just keep using that money to buy more drugs, and they get themselves into more and more trouble.
So a couple things from there, and we're getting about the 20-minute mark. So I think we're I'm going to call it right now. This is going to be a two-parter.
What's with all these two-parters?
I feel like, you know what, we're going to be mastering this two-part sequel of what's going on. So one thing to think about, especially from my point of view, is I've helped folks that have been in many spaces in terms of personal friends. They're not at a place to think for themselves in terms of what a sound mind. They might be overwhelmed with trying to look into support and help and outreach. So as a friend, as a family member, as a partner, yes, you can provide resources, but like Mark said, you can't force them to go and seek treatment. So if you identify that there is some form of addiction, whatever the form is, and you provide the resources to this individual, partner, child, and then it's on them to make that decision, at what point in time? Now I'm trying to look from the other side of the fence, meaning like you've been in this position, you've treated folks that have been in this position. At what point in time mentally do you make that decision, say, you know what, I need to make a change. I need to stop right here and do something for myself. Where does that shift mindset wise? At what point? I know it's different factors, but give me an example of how things could change there for the person that needs the help.
Yeah, that's great. I think when all of the leverages are taken away and the natural consequences have taken hold, they'll eventually ask for help and they'll want to get help. But I think if I'm hearing you right, you're asking me, how does the person that has that addicted connection, what do they do in that? When's the time for them to make a hard decision? And so if that's the nature of your question, I think the first is when it hurts more than it helps to have them in the home. When it's hurting the family, when it's hurting you, when it's hurting them, when it's enabling, if they continue in their behavior and continue in their destructive behavior, and it's affecting the whole family, I think it's time to look at making that change, putting that boundary up, asking them to leave, with loads of affirmation, but they still need to go because it's now hurting the family more than it is helping the person, if that makes sense. That I also, whenever there's abuse of any kind, when there's abusive language, abusive violence of any kind, violence can be many things like, breaking things in the house, threatening, aggressively threatening, coming at, or literally laying hands on in any way, shape, or form. That's an instant decision that you're not going to be able to ride that one out. You've got to say, no, that's the line. You've made it. You made this decision. That's the other thing, by the way. I often tell people, don't take the responsibility on for their decisions. In other words, if you have to kick them out, then that wasn't your choice. That was their choice by their behavior. And that's how you frame it. Say, I'm so sorry, but you've made the decision, the choice to actually have to leave because you're causing harm to this family. And you made that decision on your own. And I'm not going to allow that decision to hurt this family any longer. So they'll try and accuse you. Oh, you're abandoning me. You're this, you're that. They're going to say spew all kinds of things at you. You just have to know that none of it is true. And a lot of times when I'm working with people in amends, like, going through the 12 step, when they come to the amends section, step 8, they actually, that's one of the things they make amends for the most is for, telling them that it was all their fault or blaming them for everything that happened. Because when you come to your sober self and realize, no, actually that was all on me. That wasn't my family's fault. And so that's another one. Then also when little people are negatively affected. So if there's kids in play and they're being negatively affected every day, they're living in fear, they're living hiding under their bed, they're scared. That you're not just making a decision for yourself, you're making a decision for them, and you have a responsibility. In fact, if it's a spousal situation, your responsibility to protect the kids is higher than your responsibility to protect the husband or the wife. That's just a fact. Kids have to come first. So that's going to be some of the indicators for you that it's time to make a move. Now, before you do that, of course, you're asking them, listen, here's the resources. Please go get some help. Get into AA, get into rehab, whatever. You've already provided all of that, and there's been no change. Lots of broken promises, but no change. Then you have to just come. When it hurts more than it helps having them in the house, then it's time.
And that's got to be tough for family or someone, that partner, to turn their back on family or spouse. It's got to be hard.
It's heart-wrenching. Yeah. But I've seen people hold on for way too long. And, think of it this way. Am I helping or am I hurting that person I love? If I allow them to stay in their addiction and continue to affect me and and the family around me, I'm actually not helping them. I'm piling up grief. I'm piling up resentment. I'm piling up regrets. So, and I'm piling up shame. I can't tell you how many people have told me, like, I should have acted way sooner. But I just didn't want to reject them. I didn't want them to feel rejected. And it was like, yeah, but the shame of sticking it out has been far greater damage to them, because now they have to regret way more damage that they caused. And so their journey has actually become harder to healing now. And that was one thing in my healing journey that I can tell you. My parents, because they were harsh, and my dad in particular was harsh, or was very rules orientated, if you will. It probably helped me a bit, because they just I took off at 15. I couldn't stay in the house. I left. So all my regrets were the things that I did outside the house. The regrets I had from in the house were actually far more hard to get over than all the things I did outside the house. And so when you've hurt your direct family so deeply, so when I came out of, I had to look at what I did to my son when I finally started my healing journey, when I chose sobriety, and to get the healing I needed, to get the support I needed. It was because I looked at my at the time 2-year-old son and saw the damage I was doing to him. And something woke up in me and said, why am I doing this to him? He's innocent. He's the joy of my life. What, and so it had to be this epiphany in me that did that. The more my wife, yelled at me, nagged at me, whatever, about my behaviors and about what I did and how I was affecting my son, the more I hardened my heart. But when I had that epiphany on my own, I realized what was happening. But she also made the hard decision to say, she wasn't going to move with me when I took off across the country. And so she was brokenhearted, but she was willing to let me go because she saw I was doing more damage to her and my son than I was whatever. And it was in that journey that I came to my senses. So anyway, I don't want to take more time on that, but that's when you need to really think it through.
We're going to probably go another 5 minutes. We're at the 30-minute mark. So we want to,
Yep.
I want to end on two things.
Sure.
The latter will be, let's talk openly about, we understand that this is present in the household. What are some of the channels that we talked about? Resources, right? Let's talk a little more specific. We'll save that for the last part of the call, or this session. The one I want to really focus on is just the mindset of the person that is going through addiction. That epiphany, that moment that, you know what, there is hope. There is another chapter I need to write that hasn't been written. Right. At what point, when they realize that and they're saying, I need to go into a treatment center, I need to get help.
Yeah.
Walk me through that mentality of like, when does that happen? Is it just you have so much time to think and self-reflection and all of a sudden you're making a sound decision because, or no. Like, walk me through that mindset. I need to understand from like people that are dealing with this, and like, you're not dealing with someone that's going to make logical, rational decisions. So
no, I think
where are they coming from?
I mean, it's stages, right? Like, and everybody's different. So this is as unique as the person. So I'm generalizing when I say this. I'm drawing from my own experience. What I said was I had an epiphany that I was doing a lot of damage to the people I loved. That doesn't always come to everybody every time. That was one of the things. But you have to recognize, I think what happens is an event is quite often a motivator. So something happened, maybe you get arrested, you do actually finally, physically do something to your spouse that you said you would never do, and it's like a wake up call, like it's a whoa, I have hit bottom here. It's when you think you've hit bottom. Now I hit several bottoms. I thought I hit bottom, and then it was like, nope, that wasn't bottom. This is bottom. Nope, that's not bottom. So it was a bit of a process. Some people start the journey and then relapse. They get triggered and they relapse, and but it's not how many times you relapse; it's how many times you get back up. I always tell people, look at how long you were sober. Don't look at how quickly you relapsed. And so, one guy I was helping, I said, they relapsed after 2 weeks of sobriety, and they just were beating themselves up. And I said, whoa, hang on. In the last 10 years, how many days were you sober? Well, just the 2 weeks. And I said, yeah, so out of 10 years, you were just sober for 14 days. So you've proven to yourself you can do it. And the guy's face lit up and he realized, wow, yeah, I need to look at what's strong, not what's wrong. And so it helped him get back up. It said, listen, you don't look at the relapse, look at the future. Look at your purpose, go forward. And we can talk more about that next time. So what you do want to do is strike the iron when it's hot. So if somebody has an epiphany, if they say, I need help, they call with a whimpering on the phone, I've hit bottom, I need help, get them into rehab quick. Get them on the waiting list, get them some support right away. You can't, as a family member, probably be that support because of the boundaries, but there's lots of organizations you can reach out to in your local area. You might have those on speed dial ahead of time. You might call them ahead of time and say, listen, I've got a son, or I've got a husband, I got a wife, I got a daughter that is addicted. I just want to be ready. What do I do the second they tell me they're ready to get help? and have it pre-set up, have it pre-arranged, because that could give you some peace of mind as well, that you are doing what you can do when you can do it. That's the key for the helper. It's like you can only do what you can do when you can do it. So just have the plan in place, have the connections, have the phone numbers ready to go. So when they call and say, I've hit bottom, quite often, by the way, I'll have them make the call. Here's the number. You probably lost the number I gave you. Here's the number. Call them right now. When you've hung up from them, call me back and tell me what they said. And because I want them to do the call. I want them to make the effort. Because if I do it for them, now I'm controlling again. Now I'm kind of controlling the process. So I want to empower them as much as possible right from the beginning. So I get them to make the phone call to the rehab place or the recovery house, and they will call and say, hey, I'm in trouble here. And usually it's not instant. They're so full nowadays, so it's not an instant thing. But then the second step is to call somebody that you can get some help from. That's why you do the research. So there could be an AA group, for example. Get them to an AA group that day. There's meetings running all the time, lots of places. That day or the next day, get them to an AA meeting. Say, I'll pick you up. We'll go together. And then you go to the AA meeting, and it just gives them a little bit of hope. They hear other stories. They see other people that are going through the same thing as they are, and it can really help.
And that's a good thing. And I think we'll end it there, because I think in part 2, I definitely want to talk about how do you support this partner when they get out of rehab, when they get out of, in terms of when they get clean and they're in a better place, like how to support them when they get back home. But to the point you just made too, is, and we said it earlier, also look for the family support. There's family support services that will support you, because you're going through this as well, and your family members and folks that are involved to support you in your mental health and your well-being. Yeah,
well, we'll go there next time, because it's super important, and maybe that will leave a good cliffhanger for you to come back and watch the next episode next week, because I will give you some very clear ideas and tips on how you can survive, how you can be well through this whole thing, because that's the helpers, the family that's affected often go without any help. All the resources and help go to the addict and not to the family. And so I have some specific ideas around that we'll talk about.
Okay. So on that note, we're going to end part 1, as many of part 1s. This is part 1 of this series, and we're going to pick up part 2 next week. So definitely come back for part 2. So for Mark and I just want to say thank you again, and tune in next week.
Thanks, everyone.